We have great news for all of you. 13-year-old Raunak Sadhwani made his maiden GM norm at the Aeroflot Open 2019. Now, making GM norms is extremely difficult because you need to have a rating performance of 2600, and if you look at Raunak's performance at the Aeroflot Open, it's simply phenomenal. He has been unbeaten in the last 8 rounds. He's beaten Srinath Narayanan, 2572 GM, and he's played against 6 players above the rating of 2600 and drawn against all of them. Now I'm going to come to Raunak's games from the Aeroflot Open a little later. For now, first I want to speak about a very interesting game that this youngster had played around, 3 months ago or 4 months ago at the Isle of Man International 2018 in the first round. I guess you remembered it right. He was facing none other than Vishy Anand, and Raunak at that point was just 12 years and some 11 months old. So very young boy sitting in front of Anand, and Anand when Raunak played e4, he replied with e5. Now this is a game which I'm going to use Raunak's notes which he has sent to chessbaseindia, and I'm going to read them out at important moments to tell you how deep this boy thinks, and you would get to know better about his talent. So after knight f3, knight c6, bishop d5, a6, it was a standard Ruy Lopez, and Anand played the move g6. Well, Raunak was surprised and he writes, "Usually my opponent does not go for these setups, but he had recently played 3g6. So instead of over here, he had played g6 on the third move against Erik Hansen at the Olympiad. And so I also thought of checking this before the game." So Raunak was prepared. Bishop g7, c3, and this is very logical. You want to play d4 and control the center. b5, and here Raunak was already out of his preparation. Anand has played some unusual move orders to confuse Raunak a bit. Now knight g7 was possible, but then white would play d4. So first Vishy played d6, and after d4 he took on d4. Now taking with the pawn is definitely possible, but Raunak went knight into d4, and his explanation is, "In the game I was not sure whether to take with the knight or pawn, but I thought the knight is better because white has no issues in the center." So this is very interesting, because if you take with the pawn, then these can become targets, like you can go bishop g4 at some point and try to create pressure against the central pawns, but after knight takes d4 they are not such big targets. And black also has problems with the f7 square. So for example, if he were to play knight g7, which is not a great move, then there is a small tactic here. I hope that you can find it. Yes, you are right. You can just take, knight takes, and here just take on f7. Queen d5 doesn't really work right now because of queen d7. So bishop f7, king f7, queen d5, and you win the knight. So instead of knight g7, Anand played bishop d7, and here Raunak played a very nice move according to me, bishop to d5, pinning the knight and creating further pressure. Now knight g7 was played, so this was logical, defending the knight, but the youngster had prepared bishop g5. You can see how there is a pin on this diagonal, there is also a pin on this diagonal. It's playing very actively. f6, knight into c6, bishop takes, knight takes, and bishop h4. So we've reached this position, and Anand played the move queen to d7. Of course, short castling is bad. I hope you saw it already, because of queen to d5 check, and you lose the knight on c6. Queen d7 was played, defending the knight on c6, and now it's your move, white to play. What would you do here? Well, I hope that you were able to think that the most important thing is to keep the king in the center, and this is what Raunak did. He went for the move a4. Very nice play, opening up his rook on a1, attacking the queenside pawns, and at the same time preventing castling. This is as good as it can get. If black now castles, then after AB, you take the rook, and queen d5 check wins the b5 pawn. So after a4, rook b8 was played by Anand, and once again it's your move. What would you do here? Remember that, like Raunak, you have to keep the king in the center. Right, after AB, Raunak played the move over here, rook to a6. Now this is very important. It's possible to play moves like knight a3 here, but you know your rook will be behind the knight. So instead of that, why not go in, and at the same time you are stopping castling, because now once again the knight on c6 is hanging. So knight e7 was played by Vishy, and here once again you stop castling with queen b3. I think this is phenomenal play by the youngster. He's playing against the 5-time world champion, and he's posing him with so many problems. Now Anand got really nervous, I would say, at this point, and I think rightly so, because his king cannot castle. If that doesn't happen, his rook is in, and the knight is slowly going to come out. The rook will join in the battle. So white is having everything going right for him. So what Vishy did, and this is what experienced players do, is that he shifted the flow of the game and he played queen g4. Now this move is objectively pretty bad, but well, when the position is bad, at least you take some material. So he took the pawn on e4, and here Raunak made a powerful move which was missed by Anand, and or maybe he underestimated it. So can you find it? It's white to play. Okay, so Raunak played the move rook to a7, and this is very powerful because c7 pawn is attacked, and there is no real good way to defend against it, because if you are going to play something like queen c6, I can go rook e1. Now the rook attacks down the e file and the queen joins into e6. This is already very dangerous. Knight a3, all the pieces join in, and after knight f5 you are completely winning. c7 is falling. So this was very good. After rook a7, even a move like queen c4 makes no sense, because you can just take and play rook into c7 when the c4 pawn would hang. So king went to d7, and Anand is now just playing move by move. You know, he knows that he is in trouble, but well, you have to keep making moves. So Raunak played rook d1, again a strong threat of rook into d6 as this pawn is pinned here. Rook b6, and developing the last piece, knight a3. White is just doing excellently. Now knight c8, and here Raunak played the move f3. However, I think it's a good moment to take a pause here and try to work out all the details of a very strong move that white has here. Okay, I hope that you took around 10-15 minutes. If you haven't done that, please do so and try to think what would you play here as white. It's a very good position to train your calculation. So bishop into d6, I hope you considered this move. Now first thing is that knight into d6 is very bad because of queen f7, and now c7 pawn is falling. If queen to e7, then you have the very strong, yes, rook takes c7 and white wins. So after bishop into d6, of course rook into d6 had to be played. That's the only move. And now queen to f7, check. Now queen e7 is possible, but rook into d6 comes up next. And you will see that if knight takes, then you have rook into c7 and you lose the queen on e7. So you must take with the king. And now knight into b5, king e5, and here comes the star move, queen to c4. Now this knight, queen and the rook are going to checkmate this king in the center of the board. Not easy to see, and this is what makes chess very difficult, because such moves like backward queen c4 and you suddenly start having questions, will it end in a mate or not? And afterwards when you see this position, you're like, yeah, of course this should be winning, but during the game it's not so easy. So queen f7, so the point is after bishop d6, rook d6, queen f7, queen e7 is not so great, knight e7 has to be considered. And this is what Raunak had done, he calculated all of this, and also rook into c7, king into c7, knight b5, but the variations keep getting more and more complex. So now king c6 is possible, also king d7. If king c6, you have knight into d6. Very important to note that rook into d6, king c5 is complicated, perhaps this is not so clear because there is a back rank mate happening here. So knight takes d6, queen e2, queen b3, queen takes, rook d8 and b4, and your queen combined with these two pawns is just very strong. So knight b5, king c6 is taken care of, and after king d6 you take with the rook, king c8, rook d1 to stop back rank. And here I think it's enough to stop. You have 2 pawns, a very active knight for a piece, and yeah, you can attack with rook a1, the rook could come in. There are so many different threats that white should be confident enough to convert this position. Of course you can continue to analyze this further, but if Raunak would have seen until here, he would have gone for this. Anyway, this was the very nice variation where we saw bishop into d6 exactly over here. Raunak played f3, which is not at all bad, but of course bishop d6 is what he didn't go for. f3, queen e8, rook to a5, queen e6, queen b4, keeping the queens on. He realizes that this king is weak, I need to keep my queen on the board, and here very naturally he took on b5, but perhaps much stronger was to take with the knight. Rook takes b5, rook e8, knight c4 and rook a6 was played. Here white is still much better, and instead of rook b8, rook b7 threatening knight d6 would have been very strong. I think with this bishop, knight, rook and queen, this is just winning for white. But rook b8 gave black some chances, bishop e3, king h1, rook c6, knight a5, and here already the position has now eased out for black. White is around even at this point, but he went on to lose the game because he lost the thread. After c4, black king starts running, he had to sacrifice a pawn, and once Anand gets a position like this, he was able to convert. So Anand won the pawn and he was a pawn up and he went on to win. But look at this fantastic play by the youngster. What I was really impressed are moves like bishop d5, then bishop g5, then taking on c6 and playing a4, preventing castling, and then bringing in the rook, playing queen to b3. So all of these moves are a sign of an extremely tactical and a sharp-minded player who understands what's happening in the position and takes measures against it. So that it doesn't come as a surprise that Raunak made his maiden IM norm at Aeroflot. Even Anand said after the game and in many interviews subsequently that Raunak Sadhwani is a big talent. One more game I would like to show before I end this is Raunak's victory against Alexander Fier in the Llucmajor Open, and there's a very nice story to it. I've published an article on the chessbaseindia website, but it would be a nice thing to repeat the story over here again with the game. Okay, so we joined the game at this point and Raunak is playing with the white pieces against Brazilian GM Alexander Fier. And just before the game, Raunak was in a coaching camp with Farukh Amanatov, who is a very strong player from Tajikistan and also a good coach. And when they were analyzing, Farukh told Raunak, don't fear your opponents. This is something which Raunak had some issues with, and so Farooq told him no fear. And after a point it became quite repetitive that whenever an interesting position would come, Farooq would say no fear and Raunak would try to attack. But then there came about this joke where there is this player called Alexander Fier. So whenever Farooq said no fear, Raunak would reply no Alexander. And it so happened that after the training camp ended and Raunak had improved as a player, he went to Llucmajor Open, and in the second round itself he was paired against Alexander Fier. It's very surprising. And we reached this position and Raunak took on d4 with his knight. Fier played bishop b6, and after king h1 he took on d4 attacking the rook. I think words of Amanotov must have rang in Raunak's head here, and he said no fear and pushed his pawn to f6. Of course, taking the rook would be completely incorrect, because after queen g5 this is a very big attack. You have bishop e4 coming, moves like queen g5. This is just over. Even a move like e4 doesn't save, because I just take the bishop on a1 and I'm going to continue my attack. So g6 was played, and now queen to d2 threatening queen h6. Rook ae1, nice little move, and after bishop c3 there is a mate here, rook g8, and the rook came up. Now the threat is to take on h7, king h7 and rook h4. This is a very common mating trick. Queen f8 was played, and now this doesn't work, because if you take rook h4 the queen interposes. Queen g5 was played, and after h6 rook to h4. So you have these pieces all huddled up in one sector of the board, but Raunak has more firepower coming in. He played bishop e4, and now there might be sacrifices looming big time on g6 and h6. a4 was played. Black thought everything is under control, and now I am going to throw the mic to you in this position. What do you do here? It's white to play, and what do you think Raunak played? Okay, if you thought that you need to bring the rook into the game, very good, because you need one more piece. However, it's very difficult to get the rook into the game, especially because after AB, if you move your rook, the black rook is going to jump in and create some problems on the queen side. And so Raunak found the move g4, which is simply fantastic, because he wants to bring the pawn into the game, which is also an attacking unit. At the same time, he has a very cheeky idea. So after AB, here rook h8 was played, but let's see if rook a3, what happens here. What do you do now? Queen to h5, and the threat is to play g6 followed by queen in g5 and queen into h6. Fantastic point, bishop d2, g5, and you win a piece. So this entire idea with g4, moving the queen to h5 and playing g5 is just so original by Raunak. I'm extremely impressed by this. So g4, AB, rook h8 was played. Now queen h5, bishop went to d2, g5 in the game, bishop f4, and rook h3 was played. I think if you took here, there would be a lot of technical work required. So Raunak kept the rook on the board, and here he played the move c5, which is very strong. Of course, there was also another way to win, bishop g6, fg6, and now the difference is that there is no rook on a8, so you can play f7 and the h8 rook is hanging. This was also winning. However, he went for c5, dc, rook d1, and here d6 was winning, but he took some time, rook e1, but finally he did get the win, because now rook a8 is coming in, king g8, bishop g6, and this is how after g6 it ended in a win for white, because if queen h8, queen f7 is a mate. So I think overall Raunak learned very quickly from his mistakes, or you can say from his training camp, where his coach told him, you should have no fear, you should play confidently, and he did so in this tournament, and he was able to beat Alexander Fier, who is a strong grandmaster. So clearly from these two games against Anand and Fier, you realize that Raunak is a tremendous talent with excellent tactical skills. At the Aeroflot Open also he's played extremely solidly. However, if there is one point which I would like to say about his games, is that there were a few games where he agreed to draws very quickly. I would just like to point that out. So he drew his first round against Amin Tabatabai, a very fighting game where Raunak was completely winning, but he had to draw. In game 2 he beat Srinath Narayanan, which was a great game again. And in round 3 he was playing against Kismatulin, and with the white pieces he went for this quick draw here by repeating the moves, which is not a great thing. I think Raunak wanted to play solidly, but at the same time I think he will be surely thinking that with the white pieces next time he should be playing much more aggressive. Well, here's his final position against Inarkiev, where he was completely better with the black pieces. As you can see, he has 7 pawns against white's 6 pawns, and also 2 of the pawns are mangled. So here as well I think black has excellent chances to continue and play for a win, but they agreed to a draw. Another very surprising result was against Gordievsky, where Raunak had just played the last move c into b4, and I was very surprised that the Russian player Dmitry Gordievsky agreed for a draw here, because I think after queen e7, bishop e2, rook a d8, black is the one who can try. I mean, its position might be still has a lot of fight, but I think black is the one in the driver's seat here. So to accept a draw against a player who's 150 rated points below you, I think Gordievsky here didn't assess the position so well. But if you do think that Raunak does not fight hard in his games, then you are absolutely wrong, because look at this game. This is the 6th round against Idani Poya, and Raunak is black, and here after b4 he went for a fantastic move. This is all theory, but still, this is g5, attacking the knight over here on f3, and after bishop g7 e5, creating play here after knight e4 f5. So if you are thinking he cannot fight, that's absolutely wrong. He chooses sometimes not to fight. b6 and knight e7, this is fantastic game. d3, e4, and then the knights jump to e5, and I was very impressed by this game. Fantastic. Even the king went to h6, reminds us of Vidit versus Rapport game from Vaikanze. And here once again in a very good position, Raunak agreed for a draw here very abruptly, which I think was not a good sign, because he's better here according to me. Of course the position is crazily complicated, and I think personally I would have also gone wrong here with the black pieces, or any strong GM would also have, but still this is the position which he should have played on. And in the 8th round against Boris Grachev, Raunak was white, and he played this variation in the Sicilian, and after knight h5, once again the players agreed to a quick draw. So this is my overall assessment of Raunak as a player. Extremely talented. He can fight when he wants to. When he doesn't want to, he agrees to a quick draw, and I think this is what he should be working on next. If he decides to fight more, it's very certain that he would become a GM very soon, and much beyond that. But if he continues making such short draws, he will have to at some point adjust himself, because with all this talent, with all this tactical ability that he showed against Anand, Fier, and so many other players, I think Raunak should fight on. But nevertheless, first GM norm is a great achievement, and this is going to boost his confidence. And today he plays SL Narayanan. So let's look forward to that game. Thank you all for listening to me, and congratulations, Raunak.